Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee-kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're moving into Volume 3, which is a completely new book of the book series, and we're starting from Chapter 1, moving into Chapter 10. So we're going to discuss all of those 10 chapters today in our class. So if this is your first time joining, welcome. I'm pleased that you're here. We'll explain to you how this program works, and you're welcome to learn and grow and develop in this program if you like. So what we do is a student will volunteer to read a chapter, and then after a student reads a chapter, I'll share some teachings on that, and then we'll open up to any questions that you guys might have related to the chapter. You can ask questions by putting that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section, and I'll be able to see that and then answer your question for you. And if you'd like to volunteer to read, you can electronically raise your hand in Zoom, and I'll be able to see that and then call on you to be able to read. So we're going to start with Chapter 1 of Volume 3, and this book, it's a really interesting book because it has a real spectrum of teachings of the Buddha. When I used to travel before COVID and I was going on travel, if I was going to take a book with me, it would typically be this one because it has such a spectrum of teachings of the Buddha. So you're going to get a wide spectrum of his teachings. It's titled Foundation in the Teachings. So is there somebody who would like to volunteer to read this particular chapter? Okay, it looks like Samantha's volunteering. Go ahead, ma'am. And then Roxanne will get you on the next one.
One who points out treasure. Ananda, I shall not treat you as the potter treats the raw damp clay, repeatedly restraining you. I shall speak to you, Ananda, repeatedly guiding you of what to avoid. I shall speak to you, Ananda. The truly dedicated will stand the test. Regard him as one who points out treasure, the wise one who, seeing your faults, guides you of what to avoid. Stay with this sort of teacher. For the one who stays with a teacher of this sort, things get better, not worse.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So this particular Chapter 1, it's titled One Who Points Out Treasure. And the Buddha is talking to one of his close students, Ananda, who was either his brother-in-law or maybe his cousin. And this individual was part of the royal family, but he left to be with the Buddha, and he was essentially with the Buddha his entire teaching career. So a lot of the discourses that we learn have Ananda in there because Ananda was one of the 500 individuals who came together shortly after the death of the Buddha in order to document the teachings. So Ananda has the best recall of the teachings. By the time you get to enlightenment, you won't ever forget the teachings that it took for you to get to enlightenment, but different people are going to have a different level of recall. But Ananda had a really deep level of recall because he was with the Buddha for so long. His mind was enlightened, so it was performing optimally. He had that clarity, that crispness, that deep memory. So many of the discourses you'll see Ananda showing up. And here what the Buddha is saying to Ananda is saying, hey, I'm not going to constantly restrain you like the potter treats the raw damp clay, because the potter is going to constantly be shaping this clay and constantly restraining this clay and trying to put it into a particular shape. But what the Buddha is saying is instead of doing that, he's going to speak to Ananda. In other words, he's going to teach him. He's going to guide him of what to avoid and, what he should be learning and growing and developing, essentially explaining the natural laws of existence. Because a teacher's job isn't to restrain their student. A teacher's job is to help them understand the wisdom that it takes to awaken to enlightenment, where they can independently verify the teachings, gain wisdom, and now they'll know what is wise and unwise. And now when they're training their mind, whether they're with their teacher or they're not, they can make wise decisions. Whereas if a student was only able to do wise things when they were around their teacher, then they're dependent on their teacher in order to restrain them. But instead, what a teacher's doing is pointing out to a student of things that they can learn and things that they can grow and develop. And then that way, as they cultivate wisdom, whether they're with their teacher or not, they can make wise decisions. And that will lead to their wholesome results or wholesome karma. Because a teacher is impermanent in your life. We're not permanent. You're going to come to us, to classes or personal guidance or things like this to get help, but then you're going to be off on your own making all kinds of wise decisions. And if you have the wisdom of the path, then you'll be able to make those wise decisions. So the Buddha is saying, hey, this is what I'm going to do for you, is I'm going to teach you and I'm going to guide you. I'm going to help you cultivate wisdom. And then he says, the truly dedicated will stand the test, because in order to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to have determination, dedication, and diligence over multiple years. It's not going to be just one class or 1 month or even 1 year that you're going to be able to train your mind to get to enlightenment. There's a lot to be able to learn, and it's going to take dedication in order to get to that point. So you're going to need to consistently put together, continuously over multiple months and years, the ability to gradually learn the teachings, gradually integrate them into your life, gradually build up your practice of, yes, meditation, but other things as well. So you're going to need dedication and diligence to be able to build up your practice. And then one of the things that a teacher does for a student is they're going to point out treasure, meaning they're going to point out things for you to be able to pay attention to. So if a student has ego, perhaps a teacher might point that out for them. Or if they're using wrong speech, a teacher might point that out to them. Or if their mind is having a craving, desire, attachment here or there, a teacher might point that out to them. And this is sometimes very challenging for the mind of the student, because there can be ego in there can be cravings in there, and it's very challenging for a student sometimes to receive that guidance. So a teacher needs to be very skillful in the way that they present these kinds of things to their students, but then the student needs to be dedicated enough to listen and understand and see this as treasure. Because the teacher is saying, hey, there's a diamond to pick up, there's a sapphire, there's a ruby, or there's an onyx or something like that, or there's a piece of gold over there. And if a student just ignores it, they're not able to look at that and gain the wisdom to be able to pick that up and improve their life practice. So if a teacher's saying, hey, you've got some ego right here, you've got a craving over here, or maybe you could have used better speech in this situation, it's really wise for a student to take heed of that guidance, because a teacher who's teaching in the way that the Buddha taught wouldn't have any expectations. They wouldn't want anything from their students. They're only doing it out of loving kindness and compassion to help their students to be able to learn and grow and develop and get to this peaceful and joyful mental state. So if you've got somebody in your corner who doesn't want anything from you and doesn't expect anything from you, but yet they're helping you to be able to learn and grow and develop on the path to enlightenment and improving your life, because that's what the path to enlightenment is to improve the condition of your mind and the condition of your life. If you've got someone like that in your corner, then the Buddha is saying, stay with this sort of teacher, because things only get better. They don't get worse. So this is his guidance here, is to stay with the sort of teacher that's willing, out of loving kindness and compassion, to take their time to point out things to you that can be helpful for you and can help you grow and develop. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Chris has a question. Go ahead, sir.
So thank you for doing the class twice, because I get to follow up on a question. And it was taking me a long time to understand why I was seeing this paragraph differently than you. And it took me, I think I understand it, but let me know if I'm right, please. I think what happened was that when it says, Ananda, I shall not treat you as a potter treats the raw, damp clay. From what I understand, there shouldn't be a period there. It should continue saying repeatedly restraining you, because he won't repeatedly restrain people. And then the new sentence should be, I shall speak to you, Ananda, repeatedly guiding you of what to avoid. Is that true? Do you think I understand there clearly? Because I feel like that would clear up confusion for me.
Yeah, that's not the way it was written down, but that is the way that you can understand it. That if you understand what a potter does to raw damp clay, if you've ever done pottery before, you're constantly shaping it and molding it, then you understand that the Buddha is saying, I shall not treat you. as the potter treats the raw damp clay. So he's going to do the opposite of what the potter does. And now he says, repeatedly restraining you, I shall speak to you. So he's not going to be repeatedly restraining his students. That's what he's actually saying here. But if you read it as a period there where you mentioned after the repeatedly restraining you, that would be the better way to understand it through the way that we punctuate things today. So let me check if we have questions on Facebook or YouTube. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions there, so we'll move on to the next chapter. And Roxanne had volunteered to read this one. If you'd like to read this one, ma'am, you're welcome to.
Rare that one obtains the human state. Monks, suppose that this great earth had become one mass of water, and a man would throw a ring with a single hole upon it. An easterly wind would drive it westward. A westerly wind would drive it eastward. A northerly wind would drive it southward. A southerly wind would drive it northward. There was a blind turtle which would come to the surface once every 100 years. What do you think, monks? Would that blind turtle coming to the surface once every 100 years insert its neck into that ring with a single hole? It would be rare, vulnerable sir, that blind turtle coming to the surface once every 100 years would insert its neck into that ring with a single hole. So too, monks, it is rare that one obtains the human state. Rare that a Tathagata, an arahant, a perfectly enlightened one arises in the world. Rare that the teachings and discipline proclaimed by the Tathagata shines in the world. You have obtained that human state, monks. A Tathagata, an arahant, a perfectly enlightened one has arisen in the world. The teachings and discipline proclaimed by the Tathagata shines in the world. Therefore, monks, an effort should be made to understand this is discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the cause of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the elimination of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness.
Okay, thank you, Roxanne. So I think most of you guys have seen this chapter before, but I'll just explain it in case there's someone on Facebook or YouTube that hasn't studied with me much. But those of you guys in Zoom, I think you've seen this before, as well as the last one as well. Here, the Buddha is describing how rare it is for an individual to obtain the human state and have a Buddha awake during that period of time, and for those teachings to actually be shining in the world. And he's relating it to this analogy of the earth being completely flooded, and there's a ring, this single ring on the surface of the earth that is being blown around by the wind all over the place. And now there's this blind turtle that comes up once every 100 years to get air. And he's saying, how likely is it that this turtle is going to insert its head into this ring? And of course, it's very, very rare. So the Buddha says, okay, it's very rare that one obtains this human state. So now that you're in this human state, you can understand that this is the most ideal state for you to be in, because now you have the ability to get to enlightenment, where in other existences you wouldn't have necessarily had the same ability in the hell, animal, or afflicted spirit realm. And even in the heavenly realm, those beings oftentimes are very complacent. So here in the human realm, this is the ideal state. So it's very rare that one even comes into the human state. But then to be alive during the time that a Buddha is awake or in the world, this is extremely rare. A Tathagata is a Buddha, and Buddhas are very rare. The last one that the world's currently aware of existed over 2,500 years ago. So to be in the human state while there's a Buddha in the world would be extremely rare. And then to have the teachings shining in the way that a Tathagata would share them, because for the teachings to shine in the world, a Buddha would have deep wisdom to be able to help them to be able to do that. And during that time frame, that's the most ideal time for somebody to get to enlightenment. So if you're alive in the human existence and there's a Buddha that is in existence, and that individual is obviously with their deep wisdom bringing the teachings into the world in such a way that they can shine, this is your ideal time to be able to get to enlightenment. And the Buddha's helping students to understand that hey, you've met all these criteria and it's so rare. So don't allow the mind to be complacent. Instead, make an effort to understand this teaching of the Four Noble Truths, because the Four Noble Truths is where you have the breakthrough to getting onto the path to enlightenment. Understanding the problem in the mind is discontentedness. That's those conditioned feelings of pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant, where the mind's going up and down based on some condition. That now if it's sunny outside, the mind will be happy, but if it's raining, you might be sad. Or if your bank account balance is a certain level, you'll be happy, but then when it goes below that, you'll be sad or frustrated or agitated. This is the mind in its unenlightened state, not understanding the Four Noble Truths, that the mind is having craving and clinging. And that's the cause of discontentedness, is that the mind is craving permanence and wanting things to be a certain way. And the elimination of that is to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. And the thing that is going to help you accomplish that is the Eightfold Path. That's the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. So here the Buddha is pointing to the Four Noble Truths and saying it would be wise for an individual to learn and practice and understand that, because you're in the human state, there's a Buddha that's awake during your lifetime, and the teachings are shining in the world. But even if there wasn't a Buddha awake during your lifetime, it would be really wise to learn the Four Noble Truths, because that's what's going to help you to ultimately get to enlightenment and eliminate the discontent feelings. If you didn't have that breakthrough to understanding what was causing these discontent feelings, you wouldn't be able to actually eliminate them. So that's why the Buddha will frequently point to the Four Noble Truths, because that's the starting point. That's the beginning of the trail. That's the trailhead. That's the thing that's going to advise you on what you need to be doing as you're walking forward on the path to enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom. Chris, I see you have a hand up. Is that a new hand or is that from last time? Oh, okay, there we go. Roxanne has a hand up. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. I understand that he is saying that the rarity is for all of these conditions to be simultaneous in his lifetime with his monks that he's teaching. But my question is this. He's saying that it's very rare, one, to even be born in the human state. But there are 3 billion of us right now. And so I'm curious to know, is that because few humans who make it to human form are obtaining enlightenment? So we keep coming back over and over again as new beings are evolving into human form?
Okay, so there's 8 billion human beings on the planet right now, and those...
Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. And that's a lot of beings, right? That's a lot of human beings. But waiting in the animal realm are countless beings. Like if you think about just an ant colony, you got 100,000 ants or 500,000 ants just in that one ant colony alone. And what scientists tell us is 99% of the animals that once existed in the world are now gone. There's only 1% that still exists in the world. But even that 1% is countless beings. So what we've seen is we've seen a shrinking of the animal realm. And if the cycle of rebirth is true, and there's multiple ways to verify this through the teachings of the Buddha and through observing the experiences in life, but if the cycle of rebirth is true, if we see the shrinking of one realm, like the animal realm, we should see the expanding of another realm, because we know in the animal realm they can't get to enlightenment. So those beings that are dying, they have to go somewhere, right? So they're going to go into another realm. So this is exactly what we would see, is we would see as the animal realm is shrinking, the human realm would be expanding. And now that it's expanding, even if beings started getting to enlightenment readily, we would still see a certain amount of expansion in the human realm, because these beings from the animal realm still have to make their way up into the human realm to potentially get to enlightenment. And remember, there's heavenly beings that you can't see. Not many people can see them, but they can be seen. There's afflicted spirits, which have a lot of beings there. And then there's the hell realm too. These are all formless realms. So not only are we dealing with the shrinking of the animal realm, but then there's these other realms that those animals could be going into. They could be going into hell, they could be going into afflicted spirits, they could be going into the heavenly realm, but a certain amount of them are coming into the human realm, which is expanding. And now, as beings are dying in the human realm, if they haven't gotten to enlightenment, like as you say, because there's not that many beings that are getting to enlightenment right now, because of this low point that we are, those human beings that are dying, they're going to either go to hell, animal realm, afflicted spirits, back into the human realm, or also into the heavenly realm. So we'll see that going on until such a time that the teachings of the Buddha are so prevalent in the world and they're being practiced so widely that they're well understood by humanity. And now, as beings are being reborn into the human realm, then they're more readily able to get to enlightenment. So if you think about, like here in Thailand, if you were born into Thailand, you're more likely going to be able to learn the teachings from birth, essentially. Well, if these teachings are permeating throughout the entire world the way that they could be, as more and more beings are coming into the world, they're going to be getting to enlightenment more readily. And now we'll see ultimately over time, not necessarily during our lifetime this time, but over time we'll see a shrinking down of the human realm, because there's less and less beings in the world that are being reborn. But we'll continue to see an expansion of the human realm until such a time that the teachings are being learned so widely that they're prevalent in the world. And then we'll ultimately see a shrinking of the human realm, and all these other realms will essentially start to empty out, the way that I see it.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. We have a bunch of other questions here. I'll just take them from the top. If you'd like to go ahead, Marcy.
Thank you, Teacher David. It's lovely to see everyone. Teacher David, I am raising my hand to read next, so if you would like to take the next person's question.
Okay, sure. Sounds good. Looks like Helena has a question, or maybe she's volunteering to read too, but I have a feeling it's a question.
Thank you. So, David, you predict that there will be still this expansion of the human realm, but in developed countries, fertility rates are dropping, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people are being born into countries mainly where I don't think it's very probable in some cases that they could get to enlightenment, because sometimes they don't even have education. So how does it work?
Yeah, so those are the individuals that are producing more and more beings, because if you were practicing the teachings closely and you ultimately got to enlightenment, by this point, there isn't any sexual contact, so there isn't going to be any beings being reborn. So there might be some areas of the world that they're not reproducing and their population is shrinking, but there are other parts of the world that it's expanding, right? So with, 8 billion beings in the world, let's just say 3 billion of them or 4 billion of them are, reproducing, that's going to produce more and more beings in the world. So we're just going to see a continuous expansion for a period of time until the teachings are more prevalent in the world. But you'll never get to a point where everybody is having sex and everybody's delivering babies. So there's going to be people in certain places, because of impermanence, that are choosing not to have children, and that's just normal impermanence.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so Marcy, looks like you're up, so I don't see any other questions. Let me just check a couple places. Oh yeah, here's some more questions coming in. Vibhav had a question, but his hand's down now. He had the same question. Okay, so Chris is saying, it's fascinating how I didn't realize I was confused, but then later did with the guidance you provided. Okay, you're welcome, Chris. Chris has some more here. What are the odds that humanity will cease to exist in 2028 versus roughly 80,000 years from now? I don't see that occurring, but if we don't make drastic changes to the way that we function in the world in terms of our environment, the environment is, degrading more and more. So the more that we improve our decision making, this is going to only help us to live longer in terms of humanity. As far as I understand, humanity is going to exist for another 80,000 years. But the condition of how we exist for that 80,000 years is going to be dependent on our decisions, because it's cause and effect, or action and result. So if we make wise decisions, we can improve the health of the planet, because the health of the planet being unhealthy right now, that is impermanent. We can change that, but there needs to be, continuous large numbers of people to realize that we need to make wiser choices, that over the last couple of generations, we haven't been making wise choices, that in the last 100 years, essentially, the health of the planet is degraded quickly because we've invented so many chemicals and different poisons and fossil fuels that have been used a lot. So we've got a lot of things that we've done in the last 100 years that are degrading the planet. But now we're starting to realize that. So people are starting to invent things that can circumvent that and modify the way that we treat the planet. And that is going to only lead to beneficial results, or wholesome karma. Is there any way to tell, or is that not important right now? So what I would do if I was you is, regardless of when humanity is going to come to an end, you're going to need to get to enlightenment. So just focus on that. And that's going to be the best thing that you can do, rather than worrying about what may or may not happen for all of humanity. Instead, just stay focused on your own enlightenment. And then by doing that, it's going to help you, it's going to help those close to you, and it's going to help all of humanity, because you're going to only be making wiser and wiser decisions. Okay, we have some questions coming in on Facebook and YouTube. Tonka's asking, Teacher David, do you feel that rareness of human existence was exaggerated just to make a point? I don't think so, because when I observed past lives, I saw countless animal existences, just countless animal existences. And there was only 3 human existences, 2 prior to this one, and then now this one. So it was very rare. If you compare all the different existences that I experienced, there was way more animals than there ever was humans. So I think it is very rare based on what the Buddha is describing. So now that we've got this human state, I think it's very wise for you to not be complacent. And of course, we're going to step away from the teachings for a period of time, meaning we have to digest what it is that we've learned. I know you've done that a few times, Tonka, where you've learned for maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, or a year even consistently, and then you step back for 2 or 3 or 4 months, kind of integrating the things in that you've learned during that period. And then you start, stepping in to learn some more. And now you've learned more, and now you maybe step away. This is a very common way of approaching it. So as long as one's not complacent, complacency on the surface would be to not meditate, to not consistently learn the teachings, to not be reading, to not be getting help from a teacher. But on a more detailed sense, the way the Buddha talks about complacency is that if a unwholesome thought comes into your mind and you do nothing about it, this is complacency. So if you're at work, if you're walking down the street, if you're at the supermarket and an unwholesome thought comes into the mind, if you take action to cut that off and let it go, you're not being complacent, right? And whether you're actively learning in a class during that period of time or not isn't really important. What's important is that whatever you have learned about the Eightfold Path, that you integrate that and implement it into your life, so that now you can actively be learning and growing, because you're not interested in being complacent in this human life, because you guys all have the opportunity to now get to enlightenment, because the teachings are available for you and you're able to learn and grow and develop on this journey. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions anywhere. So I think it was Marcy who was interested in reading this next chapter. This was right where it shut off earlier today at the temple, so we can pick it up from here.
Okay, thank you, Teacher David. Consciousness, conditions, name, and form. I have said consciousness, condition, name, and form, and this is the way that should be understood, Ananda. If consciousness were not to come into the mother's womb, would name and form develop there? No, Venerable Sir. Or if consciousness, having entered the mother's womb, were to be deflected, would name and form come to birth in this life? No, Venerable Sir. And if consciousness of such a tender young being, boy or girl, were thus cut off, would name and form grow, develop, and mature? No, Venerable Sir. Therefore, Ananda, just this, namely consciousness, is the root, the cause, the origin, the condition of name and form. I have said, name and form conditions consciousness, and this is the way that should be understood, Ananda. If consciousness did not find a resting place in name and form, would there subsequently be an arising and coming to be of birth, aging, death, and discontentedness? No, Venerable Sir. Therefore, Ananda, just this, namely, name and form, is the root, the cause, the origin, the condition of consciousness. Thus far, then, Ananda, we can trace birth and decay, death, and failing into another state and being reborn. Thus far extends the way of designation. Thus far extends the way of concepts. Thus far is the sphere of understanding. Thus far the round goes as far as can be discerned in this life, namely, to name and with consciousness. Thank you, teacher.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. So this is kind of penetrating into a certain part of dependent origination. For those of you guys that have studied that, that's volume 5, chapter 14, where the Buddha gives those 12 interlinking steps of showing you how a being comes into the world, experiencing life and experiencing discontentedness. He's getting down to the heart of it here in terms of what is actually leading to this rebirth. And you would need to know all 12 interlinking steps, but here he's just talking about one particular aspect of it. The consciousness is the mind. And he's saying, okay, that conditions name and form. What name and form is you can think about this as the physical body. That when there's a consciousness and a physical body that comes together, now we have a being. Because he describes what these things are in dependent origination. He talks about it in detail, but I'm just explaining to you that consciousness is the mind and name and form is essentially the physical body. So now what he's saying is, okay, if consciousness were not to come into the mother's womb, would name and form develop there? So what he's saying is, if a mind were not to come into the womb, would this physical body, would this being actually develop inside the womb of the woman? And the answer his students give is no, Venerable Sir. Okay, so if consciousness, having entered the mother's womb, were to be deflected, would name and form, the physical body, come to birth in this life? And the answer is no. Essentially, we might consider this like a miscarriage where, the sperm and egg has come together and it's starting to develop, but there's no consciousness that came in. There's no mind that came in. And now that being isn't going to grow and develop because there's no consciousness. There's no mind there. And if consciousness of a tender young being, boy or girl, were thus cut off, would the physical body, name and form, grow, develop, and mature? And the answer is no, that this wouldn't be the case, right? So if a being is actually brought into life or it was in the womb and maybe it's got 4 months of development, if the consciousness was cut off, then would it grow and mature? No, this being wouldn't continue because there's no consciousness for it to continue. So therefore, he's saying the root, the cause, the origin that conditions the growth of this physical body is the consciousness. It is the mind. So he says, I have said that name and form, the physical body, conditions the mind. In this way, it should be understood. So now he says, if consciousness did not find a resting place in a physical body, in name and form, would there subsequently be an arising of birth, aging, death, and discontentedness? No. So what he's saying here is if you're not born, then you're not going to experience aging, death, and discontentedness. And then he says, okay, therefore, we can see and we can trace that it's consciousness that is leading to this rebirth. And that's what you're working on to eliminate the continuation of consciousness. So if you think about a fire with logs in this fire, and now these logs are the fuel that's keeping this fire lit. And now there's sparks that come off of this fire, and when the wind carries them, they land and they ignite a new fire. So as long as your consciousness or the mind has contents like craving and residual memories, those pollutions of mind, as long as they exist, there's contents there. And when this life is over, if the mind is dissolving because the mind's impermanent, then the content still exists. The craving and residual memories still exist. And it needs to find a new consciousness. There needs to be a new consciousness to support the craving and those residual memories. They don't just disappear. So now, if you think about the consciousness as a cardboard box and it's got contents in it, when this cardboard box is over and it's done and it dissolves, the contents have to find a new cardboard box. And now they go into the next cardboard box. And now there's going to be another life. And what you're looking to do on this path is you're looking to purify the mind, eradicate these pollutions so that by the end of this life, there is no more contents. So therefore, there isn't going to be another cardboard box needed. So therefore, there's not going to be another consciousness that needs to find a name and form. There won't be another birth. So this is how you can understand what the Buddha is describing for you here, is that getting to enlightenment in this life, you won't experience a rebirth. And he says in other places that you'll see as you're studying this program that craving is the fuel that causes rebirth. He says it very clearly. But now he's talking about other pieces around this. But if you understand all these different pieces, then you understand what he's getting to here, which is by purifying the mind, eliminating the causes and conditions that produce the next consciousness, there won't be a rebirth. And that's what he's essentially sharing. So let me know what questions you guys have here. I see there's a question coming in from Chris on Zoom. Teacher David, is Gotama Buddha talking about conditioned consciousness being the root of name and form? Yes, that's what leads to the development of a name and form. Is there such a thing as unconditioned consciousness? Yes, the mind, when you get to enlightenment, is unconditioned, but at that point, there's not going to be any conditions that allow that consciousness to continue. So therefore, it's not going to find a new physical body or a new name and form. So that's the ending of the cycle of rebirth, because you've dismantled dependent origination. And the top line of dependent origination is ignorance or unknowing of true reality. And that's why you're guided to cultivate wisdom, because the more that you cultivate wisdom and you train your mind, you will eliminate all the other causes and conditions that are leading to rebirth and discontentedness. If so, what is unconditioned consciousness? Okay, so I've described that. That's the enlightened mind. Okay. All right, so let me just check Facebook and YouTube. Okay, looks like Tonka has something here. Is it consciousness or craving that is the cause of rebirth? It's craving that is the fuel, the cause of rebirth, and that's what leads to the development of the next consciousness. And now that there's a consciousness, it's going to find a physical body or name and form. And the reason why that craving continues to exist in the mind is because of ignorance or the unknowing of true reality. You'll see this when we study dependent origination in more detail when we get to that. But you can see it now if you go to Volume 5, Chapter 14. That's where I talk about it there, and the Buddhist teachings are there. And it's going to take you oftentimes more than just one reading or one description of dependent origination to fully understand it. So that's why I've been advising students, if you guys would like to see it prior to Volume 5, you might decide to go look at that. Okay, so going to Chapter 4, would somebody like to read this one? Okay, Marcy's volunteering. Marcy, I'm going to have you read a good portion of this, but then we're going to skip a certain portion of it as well.
Sure, absolutely, Teacher David. Pay homage to the 6 directions. Well, Venerable Sir, how should one pay homage, respect to the 6 directions according to the noble disciple? It would be good if the perfectly enlightened one were to teach me the proper way to pay homage, respect to the 6 directions according to the noble disciple. Young householder, it is by abandoning the 4 defilements of action, by not doing evil from the 4 causes, by not following the 6 ways of wasting one's substance, through avoiding these 14 evil ways, that the noble disciple covers the 6 directions, and by such practice become a conqueror of both worlds, so that all will go well with him in this world and the next. And at the breakup of the body after death, he will go to a good destination, a heavenly world. What are the 4 defilements of action that are abandoned? Taking life is one, taking what is not given is one. Sexual misconduct is one. False speech is one. These are the 4 defilements of action that he abandons. What are the 4 causes of evil from which refrain? Evil actions spring from craving. It springs from anger, ill will. It springs from ignorance, unknowing of true reality. It springs from fear. If the noble disciple does not act out of craving, anger, ill will, ignorance of unknowing of true reality, or fear, he will not do evil from any one of the 4 causes. And which are the 6 ways of wasting one's substance that he does not follow? Addiction to strong drink and slothing producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, is one way of wasting one's substances. Haunting the streets at unfitting times is one. Attending fairs is one. Being addicted to gambling is one. Keeping unwholesome company is one. Habitual idleness is one. And how, householder's son, does the noble disciple protect the 6 directions? These 6 things are to be regarded as the 6 directions. The east denotes mother and father. The south denotes teacher. West denotes wife and children. North denotes friends and companions. The nadir down denotes servant, workers, and helpers. The zenith up denotes Aztecs and Brahmins.
Okay, we're going to pause there, Marcy.
Sure.
So here, the Buddha actually encounters an individual who's practicing some Hindu traditions, because this is what was being practiced at the time. The Buddha was essentially walking down the street, and this person's like, hey, can you help me to understand how I should do this particular ceremony, but doing it based on your noble discipline, meaning your teachings, the discipline that you're teaching. And the Buddha doesn't do rites, rituals, and ceremonies and worship. So this individual who was kind of bowing to these 6 directions, the Buddha was like, oh, okay, well, if you're interested in learning how to do this type of thing based on the teachings that I share, let me help you with that. And he starts going into these teachings that are actually cultivating wisdom about the natural law of karma and the natural laws of existence that are going to lead to improved decision making for this individual. So the Buddha says, okay, for the 4 defilements of actions, an individual refrains from this and abandons this. This is taking life, taking what is not given, sexual misconduct, and false speech. These are the first 4 precepts. And as you guys know, if you studied those with me, the Buddha gives very illuminating language on this, that you can see that it's not black and white, that there's this whole area to navigate, that it's not just preserve all life at all costs, for example. It's living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. And there's ways for you to be able to do that and understanding how to navigate that. So he also goes into taking what is not given, sexual misconduct. He explains this in a lot of detail, and also false speech. So you're going to need to understand the 5 precepts from the foundational programs that I teach about that. Then here the Buddha is talking about how evil actions arise and how an individual experiences these things. Well, you guys probably already know it's craving, anger, and ignorance. That's what motivates all unskillful conduct and produces all unwholesome results, because these are the unwholesome roots that leads to unwholesome karma. And then the Buddha includes fear in here, because you can act upon fear, right? So the Buddha is saying, okay, this needs to be eliminated in order to essentially cultivate the mind. And then he says, okay, the 6 ways of wasting one's substance he does not follow. What wasting one's substance would be is like your vitality or your vigor. That if you have a certain vitality or vigor, you're going to be able to move your life forward and be able to accomplish certain things in the world. So wasting one's substance would be to be dull and lethargic and complacent and not really move your life forward through wise decision making. And now the Buddha's giving these ways that you could waste this vigor or this vitality. And addiction to strong drink and sloth producing drugs is one way that you can waste this vigor and vitality. haunting the streets at unfitting times. I know I've done this before in the past, long in the past, right? If we're going out at midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., we're haunting the streets, right? And yeah, we're going to be sleeping until 12, 1, 2 p.m. And how can we go out there in the world and make wise decisions and move our life ahead because we're wasting our substance? We're not having that vigor and vitality to go out into the world during light and daylight hours to be able to move our life forward. Attending fairs is one. Here, what the Buddha is referring to is entertainment, because this was essentially the only form of entertainment during his period of time where people would go out to these fairs, and oftentimes people would get addicted to it. Today, we might think about this as if you were scrolling social media for 3, 4, 5 hours on end, or if you're watching YouTube 3, 4, 5, 6 hours on end. This is wasting your substance, because you might decide to do those things for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, however long you need to do that. But if you just do it time after time after time, you're wasting your vitality and your vigor. You're not out there pursuing things that could be helpful and beneficial for your life. Being addicted to gambling is one, because if you're out there using your money, that your hard-earned money that is going to typically go for your food, water, clothing, shelter, and medical care, which is providing for your basic necessities. If you're going out there gambling, you're going to lose this money, and now you're not going to have the things that you need in order to invest in your future. So you're wasting your substance or your vitality, your vigor. Keeping unwholesome company is one, whereas if you have people around you that are into unwholesome things, this is only going to drag you down and cause unwholesome results for you. So it would be wise to cultivate friendships with people who are into wholesome things. And you're going to need to learn how to do that without judgment, which is part of what I teach in the Harmony and Relationships course. And then, of course, habitual idleness. This would be like just sitting around, being complacent, dull, lethargic. If you've ever done that at any point in time in your life, you can see that you didn't have the vigor and vitality to move your life forward. So that's what the Buddha is teaching here with all of these. Then what he ultimately is getting into is bowing down to these 6 directions. And essentially what he's going to do is he's going to give you guidance on things that would be wise based in your particular relationships of how to practice with those people. So here, this first one, he's talking about mother and father, and he's talking about 5 things that would be wise for us to practice. And as we're practicing these 5 things, then we will see that there's going to be this natural law of karma. We're going to experience certain results. These aren't things that you should expect or crave or desire or want, but he's just showing you this natural law of karma, that if you practice these wise decisions here, that you will then experience the results here. And this helps you to be able to see the natural law of karma, but you should never have an expectation that those things are going to occur. And he goes through these different relationships, like with teachers. He talks about how to interact with those individuals, because it would be wise to respect teachers because they're the ones who are sharing wisdom with you, and he's giving you guidance of how to do that. And then he's explaining to you what a teacher is going to do as a result of you practicing in that way. Then he talks about wife and children here. And this is really helpful to see, because every once in a while you'll see people talk about the Buddha degraded women and stuff like this. This isn't true. You won't see anywhere that the Buddha talks about that. And here he's talking to men. So he's talking to men about how to be a good husband. And you can see here how he talks. He teaches men to honor women, to not disparage women, to be faithful to the woman, to give her authority, meaning she makes decisions, right? And then providing her adornments like gifts, right? So the Buddha didn't subjugate women to being less of a role in society. Sometimes people have that in their mind and they think that that's what the Buddha did, but this is for individuals who haven't actually studied the original words of the Buddha. You can see here that he's talking to men about how to treat women respectfully. And you'll see this in other places too. And he teaches women to respect men as well. You can go through this. We're not going to have time to go through the entire thing, but he goes through and teaches you how to function in all of these different relationships. And if you've read this and you have questions about any of them, you can let me know and I will help you. Or if you have questions on any of the things that I taught, you can let me know that as well. So let me know if you guys have any questions on this chapter. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere, so we'll go to chapter 5. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, looks like Marcy's volunteering again. All right, Marcy. Oh, Vibhav's volunteering as well, Marcy. So maybe we'll go to Vibhav next.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'll read if nobody else wants to read. Absolutely.
Okay, go ahead, Vibhav.
Thank you. Four worthy deeds to be undertaken with wealth. Householder, with wealth acquired by energetic striving, amassed by the strength of his arms, earned by the sweat of his brow. Righteous wealth, righteously gained, the noble disciple undertakes four worthy deeds. What for? Here, householder, with wealth acquired by energetic striving, amassed by the strength of his arms, earned by the sweat of his brow. Righteous wealth, righteously gained, the noble disciple makes himself content and pleased and properly maintains himself in contentedness. He makes his parents content and pleased and properly maintains them in contentedness. He makes his wife and children, his slaves, workers, and servants content and pleased and properly maintains them in contentedness. He makes his friends and companions content and pleased and properly maintains them in contentedness. This is the first case of wealth that has gone to good use and has been properly utilized and used for a worthy cause. Again, with wealth acquired by energetic striving, amassed by the strength of his arms, earned by the sweat of his brow, righteous wealth righteously gained, the noble disciple makes provisions against the losses that might arise from fire, floods, kings, thieves, or displeasing heirs. He makes himself secure against them. This is the second case of wealth that has gone to good use and has been properly employed and used for a worthy cause. Again, with wealth acquired by energetic striving, amassed by the strength of his arms, earned by the sweat of his brow, righteous wealth righteously gained, the noble disciple makes the five offerings to relatives, to guests, ancestors, the kings, and the deities. This is the third case of wealth that has gone to good use and has been properly employed and used for a worthy cause. Again, with wealth acquired by energetic striving, amassed by the strength of his arms, earned by the sweat of his brow, righteous wealth righteously gained, the noble disciple establishes an uplifting offering of alms, a donation, an offering that is heavenly, resulting in contentedness, conducive to heaven, to those ascetics and Brahmins who refrain from intoxication and heedlessness, who are settled in patience and gentleness, who tame the mind, calm the mind, and train the mind for Nibbana, enlightenment. This is the fourth cause of wealth that has gone to good use and has been properly employed and used for a worthy cause. These, householder, are the four worthy deeds that the noble disciple undertakes, with wealth acquired by energetic striving, amassed by the strength of his arms, earned by the sweat of his brow, righteous wealth righteously gained. But when anyone exhausts wealth on these four worthy deeds, that wealth is said to have gone to good use, to have been properly used, to have been utilized for a worthy cause.
Okay, thank you, sir. So the Buddha is helping an individual to gain wisdom of the natural law of karma, to be able to see wise decision making that leads to wholesome results. And now with that wisdom, as you practice, you'll see more and more improvement to the condition of the mind in your life. So here he's explaining, once you've earned a certain amount of money or wealth, and now you've done that through honest means, he's describing to you four ways that you can use this wealth and ensure that it's going to good use. And the first one that he talks about is he talks about ensuring that the people that are close to you are well taken care of, like your life partner, your children. Here he's talking about slaves, of course, because they were common during his lifetime, but you might think about this as employees, right? If you have employees around you, you would like to take care of like household workers or employees and stuff like this. And he says, okay, if you've used your wealth in this way, it's gone to good use, because that's where you got to make your priority, is that if you and the people close to you, like your children and your life partner and your employees, if all of these people are taken care of, then you're going to be able to continue in the world, because these are the people who are supporting you to be able to accomplish whatever wealth it is that you're making. And if you're not taking care of them, then you're not going to be able to really move forward in life, because you're not going to have the support around you that you need. So it's wise to take care of these individuals first. Then the second ones that he talks about is, he says, protecting that wealth against loss and displeasing heirs. So we might think about this as like, having insurance or something like this. During the lifetime of the Buddha, they didn't really have big banks to invest your money or insurance and stuff like this. So maybe people would just tuck their money under their mattress, right? And if you put all your money under your mattress, so to speak, and your house floods or burns down, boom, it's lost, it's wasted. So you're going to need to, during the lifetime of the Buddha, figure out a way to protect this money so that it doesn't just disappear on you from kings. We might think about that as the government coming in and swooping up the money if you're not doing the things you need to do to take care of the government. thieves and things like this. So you're going to need to protect your wealth against these things, whether it's having a safe or putting your money in a bank or a security deposit box or making sure you pay the government the due taxes, or else they're going to come in and penalize you and things like this. And with displeasing heirs, what he's talking about here is it's wise to have a will and then make sure your heirs understand that will. He talks about that in other places where he says, like, okay, essentially be sure that you're communicating what it is that you're leaving behind for people so that when you die, it's not a big surprise and they're experiencing all this impermanence. But if you let people know as you're nearing death, what it is that you've set up in your will, by the time you die, people will understand already and they won't be displeased, and now they won't be fighting over your money. Because sometimes that's the way it is, that people don't describe and let their relatives know what it is that they've done in their will, and then when the person's dead and gone, now the brothers and sisters and other people are fighting over this money. Whereas if the person would have just been open and upfront about what was being left for them long before death, those kind of issues could have been worked out before the person passed away. So this is one of the things the Buddha is guiding you to do with your wealth, is to protect it. Then he's talking about these 5 offerings, and he's talking about your relatives, making sure your relatives, like your mom, your dad, brothers, sisters, people like this, are well taken care of. Any guests, any ancestors, and then once again the king, which is the government. And here, this is one of the few places that I see the Buddha talk about deities, and I don't know if this is a accurate translation or not, because you really don't see the Buddha talking about this anywhere. So I don't know what that's alluding to, because it wouldn't be possible to give money to those beings. So I'm not sure what that's all about, but you can understand the other ones. And then the thing that I find really interesting in the teachings of the Buddha and really wise is essentially he's saying the people that are helping to guide you to enlightenment, the teachers, him and Brahmins and aesthetics, he's saying, okay, this is kind of last on your list, is, if you've got some funds left over and you've taken care of yourself and your relatives and you've protected your money, now that would be an appropriate time to maybe make offerings to an individual who's helping you to be able to learn the path to enlightenment. And when you're making offerings to these individuals, he's qualifying it. And he does this in other places too. Here he's being pretty specific, where normally he says make offerings to virtuous practitioners, people who are practicing virtuous behavior, because that means they're training their mind. They have the wisdom of the path to enlightenment. He talks about finding teachers who don't have a muddled mind. So in other words, they're concentrated and focused and having clarity. But here he talks about someone who refrains from intoxication and heedlessness, who's patient and gentle. That means they're not going to have much craving if they're patient and gentle. Who's working on taming the mind, who has a calm mind, and who's training their mind to get to an enlightenment. Because if you're supporting that kind of individual, then your support is going to help that person and all the others that are learning with that person to be able to then get to enlightenment for larger and larger numbers of people. Because if you can imagine, during the lifetime of the Buddha, there were many, many, many people learning with him, and not everybody were practicing the teachings closely. So whenever he talks about making offerings to teachers or ordained practitioners or anybody who's sharing the teachings as a teacher, he always qualifies it to make sure that you know to make offerings to individuals who are learning and practicing the teachings closely. And now he says these are the 4 ways to make sure your wealth has gone to great use. Because by using your wealth to support teachers that are sharing the teachings, it helps you and helps countless others to be able to learn the path to enlightenment. And now the world slowly becomes a kinder, gentler, more peaceful place for everybody. So let me know if you guys have questions on this chapter. This is chapter 5, 4 worthy deeds to be undertaken with wealth. Okay, looks like Helena has a question.
Yeah, thank you. Why is he talking about giving money to Brahmins?
Because the Brahmins during the Buddha's lifetime, they, I think were doing ceremonies and rites and rituals and stuff like this, but they were also learning with the Buddha. So they weren't really ordained, but they were learning some moral conduct and they were teaching some moral conduct. But the Buddha will sometimes suggest to make offerings to them because it's still helping you to practice generosity, and it's helping those people to sustain their life so that then maybe they can learn more of the teachings of the Buddha and actually get closer and closer to enlightenment themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So Chris is asking, does applying for a home mortgage and getting a house loan cause harm in the world? If it does, can you explain why or why not if the latter is the case? it doesn't cause any harm to apply for a mortgage. But what you do need to be sure of is that you have a positive cash flow. That if your expenses are exceeding your income, now you're living kind of upside down and you're just going to go deeper and deeper into debt, building a hole for yourself. So you would like to be sure your income is exceeding your expenses. So that way you have a cushion there. Because having an extensive amount of debt is just going to put pressure on you to be able to now service that debt. The interesting thing is here in Thailand, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but if you go get a loan for like a piece of land or a house, these are usually 25-year loans. And if you die with that loan and that debt, that's an obligation that the mind has that now you're going to come back into the world in order to be able to pay this off. So here in Thailand, if you get a loan for land or for a house, they at the same time have you get life insurance too, that if you die, it pays off this loan. So that way you don't have this debt or this obligation to come back into the world to be able to service. So you would like to be aware of that if you have any debt, that as you die, that's debt that you've now taken on due to a craving, because there's a craving to acquire this particular thing. I don't have the money for it, so I'm going to go now borrow it in order to get this thing earlier than what I would be able to get it otherwise. So there is such thing as good debt, where you can take on debt that is actually helping you to grow your investments and stuff like this. But be aware of taking on excessive amount of debt in the length of your loans, because this can be from craving, desire, attachment, and now that is one more thing that the mind has to attend to and be able to eliminate. So they're not causing any harm, but you would like to be attentive to make sure that you have a positive cash flow, that your income is exceeding your expenses. So he has another question here. You had said before that Buddha often saves the most important points for last. Did he save giving to the benefit of teachings for last due to it being most important, or due to it being the last group to be given to? It's the latter. It's the last group to be given to. So he often, when he's given a list of like certain teachings or something like this, he will leave the most important thing for last. But in this case, he's ordering them in terms of how you should take care of them. You should take care of yourself and the people close to you first, because if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to continue to make income and be able to produce wealth. So that's why he's putting that one as first. Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So let's go to the next one. Okay, this is chapter 6. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, I think Marcy or Samantha. There we go, Samantha. Go ahead. We'll get you next, Marcy.
Repaying one's mother and father. Monks, there are two persons that cannot easily be repaid. What two? One's mother and father. Even if one should carry about one's mother on one shoulder and one's father on the other, and while doing so should have a lifespan of 100 years, live for 100 years, and if one should attend to them by anointing them with balms, by massaging, bathing, and rubbing their limbs, and they even void their urine and excrement there, one still would not have done enough for one's parents, nor would one have repaid them. Even if one were to establish one's parents as the supreme lords and rulers over this great earth, abounding in the 7 treasures, one still would not have done enough for one's parents, nor would one have repaid them. For what reason? Parents are of great help to their children. They bring them up, feed them, and show them the world. But monks, if, when one's parents lack confidence, one encourages, settles, and establishes them in confidence. If, when one's parents are unwholesome, one encourages, settles, and establishes them in virtuous behavior. If, when one's parents are selfish, one encourages, settles, and establishes them in generosity. If one's parents are unwise, one encourages, settles, and establishes them in wisdom. In such a way, one has done enough for one's parents, repaid them, and done more than enough for them.
All right, thank you, ma'am. This is a great discourse to help you understand that when our parents are struggling in the world, the Buddha says we can help them. And the way that is best to help them is to help share the teachings that are going to help them to train their mind. But you got to be very selective in how you do that. So here he's talking about, if you literally carried your mom on one shoulder and your dad on another shoulder, and you massage them, you bathe them, you rub their limbs, you applied ointment and balms on them, you cleaned up their urine and their feces, you still haven't done enough to repay them, because there's this debt of gratitude of having come into this world and be able to sustain your life, that they've done that for you, and now this is the most ideal existence for you to get to enlightenment. So there's this debt of gratitude that you might have for your parents, or you might cultivate over time. And one of the things that we tend to do as children is we look to repay our parents through giving them material gifts. And here the Buddha is saying, even if you establish them as the supreme lords and rulers, abounding in 7 treasures, you still haven't done enough for them. That the material objects are impermanent. They arise, they change, and they fade away. But if you're really interested in helping your parents, because your parents are of great help to you, they bring you up, they feed you and show you the world, they helped you to sustain this life, and now you're an adult and you're able to now get to enlightenment or build a life for yourself. Even if you disagreed with certain aspects of your life with your parents, which I'm sure you did. I haven't met any child who has ever agreed with 100% of everything their parents ever did for them. There might be one of those out there somewhere, but I haven't met one yet, right? So it's pretty rare that someone agrees with everything their parents did. So you're not going to agree with everything your parents did. And if you got angry and frustrated at them, that was just because of your own expectations and your own cravings. They did the best that they could based on the wisdom that they had. And in some cases, they made unwise decisions, and sometimes they made very unwise decisions and did things potentially harmful in our life. But now, as an adult, you can release all of that expectation from your mind and just realize that your parents were doing the best that they could at that particular time based on the wisdom that they had. Well, if you'd like to repay your parents, what the Buddha is suggesting is that when they lack confidence, that you settle and establish them in confidence. And whenever he's talking about confidence, it's confidence in him, the teachings, and the community. Because the very best thing you could ever do for your parents is help them to understand a bit about the path to enlightenment. Because sometimes the child learns more than the parents, and the parents aren't aware of these teachings. So when you're doing that, you're going to need to do it selectively and humbly. And then he says, okay, when a parents are unwholesome, that you try to establish them in moral conduct, maybe teaching them a little bit of the teachings. You know, you see your parents maybe lying, or maybe you see them doing other unwise things. Maybe you suggested them not to do those things. But again, you got to be very selective. You got to do this very humbly. You got to find the right opportunities to do this. When I did this with my parents, or my wife's parents, or my grandparents, I would typically do it with the parents sitting on the sofa and I'm sitting on the floor, and I would be talking to them a little bit that way. Or sometimes I'd be on my way to college. My grandmother used to drive me back and forth to college when I first started. I was only 17 years old, and I would be in the seat next to her and she'd be driving, and I would hear her say one thing or another that was really unwise, and she would have certain conduct that was unwise, and I would try to help her a little bit. Or if when you see your parents, father or mother, being selfish, this is because of craving, desire, attachment. And the antidote to that, and to help them to eliminate craving, desire, attachment, is generosity. So you might encourage them in that. And then when you see them being unwise, making unwise decisions, the Buddha teaches that perhaps we should help to establish them in wisdom. And if you've done this once or twice or 3 times and they're just not interested in anything you have to say, at that point it's time to pull back and just not go forward anymore with trying to do these things, because you've done enough at that point. If you continually try to do this and they were unreceptive to your guidance, this would just be your own cravings, desires, attachments. So you might try these things once or twice here or there, assess what their level of interest is, and then you might continue to share with them. Like my grandmother was really open to advice, but my mom, for the most part, at the beginning, she wasn't. But then over time, she started coming to me and starting to talk to me. My stepfather and my father, not interested at all. Right? They weren't interested at all. So you're going to have to assess what situation would be wise for you to share and what situation would not be, because it would be your own craving, your own ego, if you're just going in there and trying to tell them what they should or shouldn't be doing. So you're still going to need to use the 5 factors of well-spoken speech and even say, Mom, are you interested in my advice on this subject? Or Dad, would you like to hear something that could be really helpful for you in this situation? And they might say yes, and then you start sharing with them. Or they might say no, no. Because of impermanence, not everyone's going to say yes, and you just need to be comfortable with that. They're not disrespecting you. It doesn't mean that they don't care about you or they don't love you. They're just not interested in learning at that particular time. So if they say no, if you don't have craving, you won't experience any painful feelings in that situation. But sometimes they say yes, and then within the first 10, 15, 20 seconds of you sharing, you might see their ego coming up, and they're really not interested in hearing what you have to say. So that's going to be something you need to pay attention to and maybe pull back from that situation. Even though you started sharing, you might decide to not go forward if you see ego coming up, because you can't teach someone through ego. It's just not possible. So it looks like Marcy has her hand up. You have a question here, Marcy?
I do, Teacher David. So the parents of this being Marcy have not communicated in over 30 years, but I have done this being has practiced loving kindness meditation towards them, and I understand the importance of these teachings. And I'm wondering, my way of sometimes reaching out to people that I see are struggling is just send them a book, the volume 1. Would that be a way of kind of, communicating with them, but not really getting into an in-depth, like, 'cause I understand that their way of life and their lifestyle is not something that's wholesome and that I would be interested in being a part of, but I also understand that getting them some kind of, to whether they read the book or not, but having it around them may or may not, they may open it. Would that be a wise thing to do, is just send them the book, and just a simple card of, be well, and that's it.
Yeah, this can be a way that you can introduce the teachings to somebody, and then it's their choice of whether they open the book or not and read it. So I oftentimes recommend that, because sometimes people are interested in helping their relatives, but they don't know how, because they're still learning themselves. They don't have the wisdom of how to share, or maybe the relationship isn't such that they even feel comfortable to share. So one of the best things you can do is just send them a book like that, because you are trying to help them, but it's up to them to step forward and choose to study or not.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see. Okay, so there's no other questions. So Marcy, if you'd like to read this next chapter, chapter 7. This is a really interesting one.
Affection and hatred are born. Affection born of affection. Here, monks, one person is desirable, lovable, agreeable to another. Others treat that person in a way that is desirable, lovable, and agreeable. It occurs to the latter. Others treat that person who is desirable, lovable, and agreeable to me in a way that is desirable, lovable, and agreeable. He thus feels affection for them. It is in this way that affection is born of affection. Hatred born of affection. Here, monks, one person is desirable, lovable, and agreeable to another. Others treat that person in a way that is undesirable, unlovable, and disagreeable. It occurs to the latter. Others treat that person who is desirable, lovable, and agreeable to me in a way that is undesirable, unlovable, and disagreeable. He thus feels hatred for them. In this way, that hatred is born of affection. Affection born of hatred. Here, monks, one person is undesirable, unlovable, and disagreeable to others. Others treat that person in a way that is undesirable, unlovable, and disagreeable. It occurs to the latter. Others treat that person who is undesirable, unlovable, and disagreeable to me in a way that is undesirable, unlovable, and disagreeable. He thus feels affection for them. In this way, that affection is born of hatred, from hatred. Hatred born from hatred. Here, monks, one person is undesirable, unlovable, and disagreeable to others. Others treat that person in a way that is desirable, lovable, and agreeable. It occurs to the latter. Others that treat that person who is undesirable, unlovable, and disagreeable to me in a way that is desirable, lovable, and agreeable. He thus feels hatred for them. In this way, that hatred is born from hatred.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So I'll share with you guys what the Buddha is teaching here, but before I do that, I'll just share with you that an enlightened being wouldn't have hatred towards any being whatsoever. You'll find everybody to be lovable and agreeable, because you're not going to have cravings and expectations of wanting people to be one particular way or another. But what the Buddha is teaching you is how affection and hatred can come about based on certain desirable or lovable qualities that somebody might perceive in another person. And this is actually helpful for you, because you're going to see people treating you this way, or you might see your mind doing this towards others, right? And as you're seeing this, you would like to eliminate this, because you're not interested in forming your feelings based on how other people think. That's what the Buddha is talking about here. So like this first one, he says there's this particular person that you find to be desirable, lovable, and agreeable. And now there's another person who sees that person as desirable, lovable, and agreeable as well. And because of that, you find this second person to be lovable and agreeable, because they love and agree and find desirable the same person that you find to be lovable and agreeable. So therefore you love and have fond feelings towards this third person. So this is affection born from affection. Because you have affection for person A and person B has affection for person A, you now have affection towards person B because of your affection for person A, right? So affection is born from affection. And this is not what you're interested in doing. You're interested in just loving all beings regardless of how other people think or how other people act. Because now he's going to talk about hatred born from affection. So now person A is desirable, lovable, and agreeable, but person B finds that person to be undesirable, unlovable, and disagreeable. And now you treat this person who is desirable, lovable, and agreeable, there's this hatred towards the person who they see person A as undesirable and unlovable, but you see person A as being agreeable and lovable. So therefore now, because of your affection for person A, you now hate person B, and you're not interested in doing that. Whatever person B feels for person A, that's on them. That's their cravings, desires, attachments. You would like to love unconditionally, no matter what, and just love all beings. Even this person who hates person A, you can still have loving kindness for them, where you have a genuine interest in seeing them be well. No need to have hatred towards person B. And now affection born from hatred. So now there's this person that you find undesirable, unlovable, and disagreeable, but another person now finds this person undesirable, unlovable, and disagreeable. And now you have affection for person B because they hate the same person that you hate. Because you both are hating the same person, you have affection for person B. So this is affection born out of hatred. And once again, you're not interested in doing this either. And now, for hatred born from hatred. This is where person A is undesirable, unlovable, and disagreeable. That's the way you think of them. But now somebody else finds them to be desirable, and lovable, and agreeable. And because of that, you find this person to be hateful, that you hate this person B because they find someone to be lovable and agreeable that you find to be unlovable and disagreeable. So this isn't what you're interested in doing. You would like to get to the point where you have love for all beings. But you're going to see this. If there's a certain person that hates you, and then there's another person who hates you, those two people might get along really, really well because they hate you, right? That's what the Buddha is talking about here, because this can help you. And then you might find situations where two people have affection for you and now they have affection for each other. Or you might find it that a person finds you to be desirable and agreeable, and then another person finds you to be disagreeable, and now that person hates that other person, and you're like, no, that's not the way it needs to be, right? And then there's this affection born from hatred, where someone might find you to be unlovable or disagreeable, and now this other person finds you to be unlovable and disagreeable too, and now there's this hatred, right? So you can just get to the point where you have this loving kindness for all beings, and mind's not being able to do this because you don't have expectations or cravings for people to be any one particular way. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So now let's go to chapter 8. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, Keely, go ahead, ma'am. And then we've got Vibhav and Helena after that.
The foremost, the best, the distinguished, the supreme, and the finest holder.
A householder. Householder, the one enjoying sensual pleasures, who seeks wealth righteously, without violence, and makes himself joyful and pleased, and shares it and thus meritorious this, and useless wealth without being tied to it, accepts with it, and blindly absorbed in it, seeing the danger in it, and understanding the escape, he may be praised on 4 grounds. The first ground on which he may be praised is that he seeks wealth righteously without violence. The second ground on which he may be praised is that he makes himself joyful and pleased. The third ground on which he may be praised is that he shares the wealth and thus merits this. The fourth ground on which he may be praised is that he uses that wealth without being tied to it, accepts with it, and blindly absorbed in it, seeing the danger in it, and understanding the escape. This person who enjoys sensual pleasures may be praised on these 4 grounds. This householder is the foremost, the best, the distinguished, the supreme, and the finest kind of person who enjoys sensual pleasures. Just as from a cow comes milk, from milk curd, from curd butter, from butter ghee, and from ghee comes cream of ghee, which is reckoned the foremost of all this, so too this kind of person who enjoys sensual pleasures is the foremost, the best, the distinguished, the supreme, and the finest of all those who seek wealth righteously, without violence, and having obtained it, makes himself joyful and pleased, and shares the wealth and thus merits this, and uses that wealth without being tied to it, obsessed with it, and blindly absorbed in it, seeing the danger in it, and understanding the escape. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So here the Buddha is talking about household practitioners. Those are the ones who are enjoying sensual pleasures, because oftentimes during the life of the Buddha, it was ordained practitioners who got to enlightenment. Household practitioners got to enlightenment too, but it was much more rare because they didn't have the amount of time that the ordained practitioners had to be able to learn and practice. So the best that household practitioners might have been aspiring for is maybe the first, second, or third stage of enlightenment, but there were certainly some that got to enlightenment during his lifetime. So oftentimes he was guiding household practitioners and talking to them like, okay, you guys are enjoying sensual pleasures. You haven't decided to let this go yet. And now he's saying, okay, if you're acquiring this wealth, if you're looking to have meritorious deeds and you're not tied to your wealth, you're not obsessed with it, you're not blindly absorbed, and you see the danger in it, and you understand the escape. Understanding the escape is to understand the Eightfold Path in eliminating craving, desire, attachment. That's understanding the escape. So there's no harm in acquiring wealth. If you're acquiring it through right livelihood, this can be fine. It's not about whether you're rich or not. It's about how did you acquire this money and what do you do with it once you have it? Are you selfishly absorbed in it and you're just holding on to it tightly, because that's going to hinder you from getting to enlightenment? But if you understand, yes, you can acquire wealth and then use it in beneficial purposes where, yes, you're using it for the things that you need in your family and your employees and things like this, like he talked about, maybe sharing it to be able to help others get to enlightenment. And at the same time, you're learning the Eightfold Path, which is the escape. Then, okay, you're making wise choices in terms of your wealth. And now the Buddha is explaining how to essentially acquire wealth in a way that is wise. First is acquiring wealth without violence, without harming other beings. And he gives you that guidance in the Eightfold Path as part of right livelihood. Then you make yourself joyful and pleased, right? So this way you're not just living this meager existence while having this big bank account, and you're just living this meager existence, that instead you kind of take care of the things you need to take care of in order to provide for yourself. And then you use your wealth in order to perform meritorious deeds, like ensuring that you're providing donations or support for your time, effort, energy, and resources to ensure the teachings are coming into the world, and you're practicing generosity to help and benefit others. And then the fourth one is making sure that you're not attached to the money. So the money isn't the problem. It's the craving, desire, attachment, holding on to it. That's what's causing the problem. So the Buddha is saying, okay, these are 4 grounds in which a household practitioner is making wise choices around their wealth. And then he uses this analogy of taking milk and turning it into this better and better quality product, going from milk to milk curd to curd butter, butter ghee to cream of ghee. So anybody during this lifetime would understand that it's basically becoming a better and better product as you churn it more and more. And now he's saying, okay, this individual who's using their wealth in this way, they're essentially, this better and better household practitioner. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, it looks like Vibhav maybe has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you, Teacher David. I was just wondering if Buddha actually, in the teachings anywhere, there's explicit mention of householders being able to achieve enlightenment, because it seems everywhere it kind of says that householders are being taught like you can, you should use your wealth for meritorious deeds and other things, but it isn't explicitly called out anywhere that householders can attain enlightenment.
Yeah, this discourse here isn't about householders attaining enlightenment. This discourse is about how to use your wealth righteously and doing it in a way that's wise. But you can see in other discourses where the Buddha talks about everybody's able to attain enlightenment. And that's the reason why he taught household practitioners. Because remember, a Buddha is very wise. They're not going to do things that are going to waste their time. So if it was not possible for household practitioners to get to enlightenment, he would be wasting his time to teach them of how to get to enlightenment. He would just have taught ordained practitioners. But you can see in other discourses where he says everybody and anybody can get to enlightenment, essentially. But that's not this discourse. I'm just sharing with you that information so that you'll understand what he's guiding people to and what this particular discourse is connected to other teachings. He does guide household practitioners because they can get to enlightenment. And as you read through this book series, you're going to eventually encounter the discourse where he says that everybody can get to enlightenment.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And keep in mind that, putting on a robe and shaving your hair, that by itself isn't going to produce enlightenment. It's about how you understand the teachings and cultivate wisdom and train your mind. That's what's going to get you to enlightenment. I don't see any other questions anywhere. So Vibhav, if you'd like to read this next one, and then Helena, we can read the last one if you like.
Helena can go first if she likes. I've already talked.
Yeah, go ahead, Vibhav.
Okay. Welfare and peacefulness in this present life. Venerable Sir, we are householders enjoying sensual pleasures, living at home in a house full of children. We use sandalwood and from Kasi. We wear garlands, scents, and ointments. We receive gold and silver. Let the perfectly enlightened one teach us the teachings in a way that will lead us to our welfare and peacefulness in this present life and the future lives. There are Vyagapaja, these 4 things that lead to the welfare and peacefulness of the household in this present life. What for? Accomplishment in initiative, accomplishment in protection, wholesome friendship, and balanced living. Accomplishment and initiative. And what is accomplishment and initiative? Here, whatever may be the means by which a householder earns his living, whether by farming, trade, raising cattle, archery, government service, or some other craft, he is skillful and diligent. He possesses sound and wise decision making about it in order to carry out and arrange it properly. This is called accomplishment and initiative. Accomplishment and protection. And what is accomplishment and protection? Here, a householder sets a protection and guard over the wealth he has acquired by initiative and energy, amassed by the strength of his arms, earned by the sweat of his brow. Right is wealth righteously gained, thinking, how can I prevent kings and thieves from taking it, fire from burning it, floods from sweeping it off, and displeasing airs from taking it? This is called accomplishment and protection. Wholesome friendship. What is wholesome friendship? Here, in whatever village or town a householder lives, he associates with householders or their sons, whether young but of mature virtue or old and of mature virtue, who are accomplished in confidence, virtuous behavior, moral conduct, generosity, and wisdom. He converses with them and engages in discussions with them. To the extent that they are accomplished in confidence, he emulates them with respect to the accomplishment in confidence. To the extent that they are accomplished in virtuous behavior, moral conduct, he emulates them with respect to the accomplishment in virtuous behavior. To the extent that accomplished in generosity, he emulates them with their accomplishment in generosity. And to the extent that they are accomplished in wisdom, he emulates them with respect to their accomplishment in wisdom. This is called wholesome friendship. Balanced living. And what is balanced living? Here, a householder knows his income and expenditure and leads a balanced life, neither too extravagant nor too frugal, aware. In this way, my income will exceed my expenditures rather than the reverse. Just as an appraiser or his apprentice, holding up a scale knows. By so much it has dipped down, by so much it has gone up. So a householder knows his income and expenditures and leads a balanced life, neither too extravagant nor too frugal, aware. In this way, my income will exceed my expenditures rather than the reverse. If this householder has a small income but lives luxuriously, others would say of him, this householder eats his wealth just like an eater of figs. But if he has a large income but lives sparingly, others would say of him, this householder may even starve himself. But it is called balanced living when a householder knows his income and expenditures and leads a balanced life, neither too extravagant nor too frugal, aware. In this way, my income will exceed my expenditures rather than the reverse. This is called balanced living. These are the four things that lead to the welfare and peacefulness of a householder in this very life.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So this is guidance for balanced living that the Buddha is sharing of how to produce welfare and peacefulness. He's giving you this cause and effect, this action and result, the natural law of karma, is showing you how to live this better way of life. So this first one of accomplishment and initiative is essentially teaching to be attentive in the work that you do. Whatever work that you do, be skillful and diligent in that work. Don't be, lackadaisical or complacent or dull and lethargic. Continue to apply wise decision making to have initiative as you carry out your roles and responsibility in your professional career. Then he says accomplishment and protection. This is what we were talking about earlier, that you protect your money from kings and thieves, from fire, floods, and displeasing heirs. This is protecting over your wealth. This would be a wise thing to do. And then having wholesome friends. The Buddha talks about this many times in his teachings. Wherever you have wholesome friends, if they have confidence or virtuous behavior or generosity or wisdom, those four qualities that the Buddha talks about, he says wherever you see friends that are doing that it would be wise for you to emulate that. And then, of course, you need to be learning on your own as well. So having wholesome friends is going to influence you in a wholesome direction, whereas if you have unwholesome friends, you're going to tend to lean in that direction. And then there's this balanced living that the Buddha talks about. And this is what we were just talking about earlier, that your income is higher than your expenses. Because if you have it flipped, this is going to cause difficulties in your life because you're going deeper and deeper into debt. You need to be able to create this perfect, ideal life for yourself where you're doing a livelihood that you thoroughly enjoy, you have ambition and motivation, enthusiasm around, but you're also making a certain income and your expenses are below that, so that now you can live a balanced life. Because if it's upside down, you're going to feel this pressure of the bills coming at you and people are going to be showing up for their money and you don't have their money. So if you're living an extravagant lifestyle, this is due to craving, that you're living beyond your means, and you need to be able to restrain the mind and then have an income that is higher than your expenses. And in this way, the Buddha is saying you're living a balanced life, and this will lead to your welfare and peacefulness in this very life. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this discourse. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So Helena, this next discourse is somewhat similar to the one that we just read, but it's a little bit different, and now it's honing in on those four qualities of confidence, virtuous behavior, generosity, and wisdom. So if you'd like to go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. 4 things leading to the welfare and peacefulness in future lives. There are, by Hapaja, these 4 other things that lead to a householder's welfare and peacefulness in future lives. What for? Accomplishment in confidence, accomplishment in virtuous behavior, accomplishment in generosity, and accomplishment in wisdom. And what is accomplishment in confidence? Here, a householder is endowed with confidence. He places confidence in the enlightenment of the Tathagata. Thus, the perfectly enlightened one is an arahant, perfectly enlightened. accomplished in true wisdom and conduct, fortunate, knower of the world, unsurpassed leader of persons to be tamed, teacher of heavenly beings and humans, the fortunate one, the perfectly enlightened one. This is called accomplishment and confidence. And what is accomplishment in virtuous behavior, moral conduct? Here, a householder abstains from the destruction of life, from taking what is not given, from sexual misconduct, from false speech, and from liquor, wine, and intoxicants, substances that cause heedlessness, the basis for heedlessness. This is called accomplishment in virtuous behavior. And what is accomplishment in generosity? Here, a householder resides at home with a mind free of the stain of selfishness, freely generous, open-handed, joyful in letting go, one devoted to charity, joyful in giving and sharing. This is called accomplishment in generosity. And what is accomplishment in wisdom? Here, a householder is wise. He possesses the wisdom that discerns the rising and passing away, which is noble and penetrative, and leads to the complete destruction of discontentedness. This is called accomplishment in wisdom. These are the 4 other things that lead to the welfare and peacefulness of a householder in future lives.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So the same things that lead to peacefulness and welfare in future lives are the same things that lead to peacefulness in this life too, and improves your welfare. So while the Buddha is focusing on future lives here, these are all things that would be wise for you to learn and practice in this life as well. And this is confidence, virtuous behavior, generosity, and wisdom. And these are 4 qualities that the Buddha teaches to kind of get started with on the path to enlightenment. And the first one is having confidence in him as a Buddha, that he's enlightened. And you can see this if you understand the qualities of what a Buddha is. You can see that he meets all 3 of these criteria, that he got to enlightenment by himself without the help of teachers or guides. He dedicated the rest of his life to helping people get to enlightenment, and countless people got to enlightenment during that period. And then he preserved his teachings in such a way that countless more people got to enlightenment after his death. So having confidence in the Buddha means that you're working to eliminate your doubt about him, his teachings, and the community. And now this is going to help you to get welfare and peacefulness in this life and future lives, because now the mind is going to be able to learn the teachings to get purified and get closer and closer to enlightenment. Then in terms of understanding virtuous behavior and practicing it, these are the 5 precepts, because if you're doing any of these things, it's causing harm, and then harm is going to come to you. So if you can practice having the abstention of destruction of life, taking what is not given, sexual misconduct, false speech, and liquor, wine, and intoxicants, that means you're causing less and less harm. So you're going to experience more and more wholesome results. So yeah, it's going to lead to your welfare and peacefulness. Then practicing generosity, where you're joyful in giving and sharing, this is going to help you eliminate craving, desire, attachment in your mind. And this is something that you would like to be practicing each day, to practice generosity, either sharing your time, effort, energy, or resources without any expectation of anything in return from anybody else. And that's going to lead to the elimination of your cravings, which is ultimately going to lead to the elimination of discontentedness, which is enlightenment itself. And then when he talks about accomplishment and wisdom, he talks about the very first teaching that you need to know in order to get on the path to enlightenment. And he talks about the discerning of the arising and passing away. This is the universal truth of impermanence. This is the first thing that a person needs to understand, because it leads to the complete destruction of discontentedness. That if you understand that everything around you is impermanent, but yet the mind is craving permanence, now you can get to enlightenment, but you need to be able to independently verify that through your practice. So that's where you are learning the universal truth of impermanence, discontentedness, non-self. Then you learn the 4 Noble Truths. This is the very beginning of the path to enlightenment, and that's what's going to lead to the destruction of discontentedness or enlightenment itself. And that will be welfare and peacefulness in this life, that you'll only experience peacefulness as your mind gets to enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter 10. Looks like Chris has some questions here, and Helena as well. Let me read Chris's, and then I'll come to you, Helena. In a recent conversation with a friend, I was told that enlightenment strips the mind from physical form. Hence, an enlightened being is no different from a rock. I have my own ideas about it, but I might also be wrong, and I'm likely to phrase it wrong even if I'm right about some things. Can you kindly share in what ways an enlightened being is different from a rock? A rock doesn't have a consciousness. A rock isn't a living being. A enlightened being is not like a rock. It doesn't strip the consciousness. What it does is it purifies the mind of the defilements and the pollutions that are causing discontentedness. So it eliminates the anger, sadness, frustration, and all those other discontent feelings. So an enlightened being is not a rock, because an enlightened being is a living being with a consciousness and a body. The mind has been fully purified. They're no longer experiencing discontentedness. A rock is just an inanimate object with only physical form. It doesn't have a consciousness. Can you also share in what ways an enlightened being is similar to a rock? They both have physical form. That's it. That's the only way, things that are similar. Can you add any additional clarity that would provide insight as to why a person might think enlightenment is like a rock, and how to overcome this if that view should be overcome? Well, it comes from the unknowing of true reality, that ignorance or lack of wisdom, the confusion, misunderstanding. There's people out there that just doesn't understand what enlightenment is. And if it turned people into a rock, do you think that the teachings of the Buddha would be around for 2,500 years? Do you think people would be really interested in aspiring for that state of being like a rock? So this is just a person who doesn't understand, unfortunately. All right, so it looks like Helena, you have a question as well.
Thank you, Peter David. So based on those recent texts from the Pali Canon, it looks like Buddha was he was kind of fitting in the society of that time. That's the impression, I think, because he's talking about like supporting Brahmins, which is obviously the caste system, and he talks about slaves and about arranged marriages and stuff like that. And I just wonder, why wasn't he like more rebellious when it comes to society?
So in order to help somebody get to enlightenment, you need to be able to meet them where they're at. And then as you meet them where they're at, then you can help them to be able to see what would be wise going forward. So if he just stepped in and started telling everybody to change everything about their life, he would be rejected right from the beginning. So instead, you sometimes have to meet somebody. Maybe they're all the way over here on one side. Maybe they're doing 5 or 10% of the teachings. You got to kind of walk all the way to there, help them understand where they're at and how to guide them to an improved way of life. So if someone has slaves or things like this, he's not going to just say, oh, get rid of your slaves. That's unwise. You shouldn't have that. Because he does have that in his teachings. But he first needs to help them understand, like, okay, if you have slaves, wherever you are in your life currently, here's the way to practice in such a way that would be conducive to your peacefulness and welfare. And now, once you get deeper and deeper into his teachings and you've had an opportunity to practice and train your mind, now you learn deeply that it's unwise to do these kinds of things. And that's where you'll see that in other parts of his teachings. And this is where a student who's just learning a certain portion of his teachings, they might not see the totality of what the Buddha taught, that they just might see one particular thing where he's talking about arranged marriage or he's talking about slaves, and they might assume that he's supporting those things. But when you look at other teachings that he's teaching that it's unwise to have these things. So he needs to meet students where they're at and then bring them towards where it would be wise for them to be practicing. And that's what you can see if you understand the totality of his teachings.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have questions on YouTube or Facebook. All right, I'm not seeing anything there. So what I'm going to do is just thank all of you guys for joining for our class. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for volunteering to reading. This is wonderful to see you guys volunteering and even got your cameras on today. This is really nice to be able to see you guys participating in class. So thank you guys for joining and deciding that today's a day you'd like to learn the teachings of the Buddha. Next week, we're going to be in chapters 11 through 20. So if you'd like to read those ahead of time, you're welcome to do that. For those of you guys that might be joining that haven't gotten access to these books, you can go to buddhadailywisdom.com and you can download them for free. You can take it and go print it. You can order printed versions on Amazon, or you can get them here at the temple in Chiang Mai by just reimbursing us for our printing cost. Tomorrow in the group learning program, we're going to be in chapter 19, which is titled The Difficult Human Existence, Sickness, Aging, and Death. This is where you're going to learn about the life story of the Buddha and what motivated him on this journey, and also how to overcome sickness, aging, and death through understanding what's causing your discontentedness during that period of time. And then, of course, on Wednesday, I'll be doing meditation with students. We'll be doing loving kindness meditation and then opening up to any and all questions that you might have. So have a very wonderful and lovely rest of your day. Perhaps we'll see you guys in a future class. Be well and take care. Sawadee-ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.